Woo. Trying to find my way, 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 trying to find my way. I'm trying, change me.
My faith is in God alone, beyond a reasonable doubt. This brainstorm, pouring rain on your season of drought. Just trying to lay a couple seeds in the mouth. Thanks for listening. You ever get the feeling you was missing?
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, Scott Lane, the Black Bruce Wayne, a.k.a. the real Adam Coleman. So, you're riding with Tru-ID. And, one thing I realized about myself, man, is I can be pretty forgetful. There was a series I started a while back where I was teaching at a Bible study, the No Ceilings Bible study, in fact. I would go up there once a month and, teach on different apologetics issues. And I recorded three different segments, three different, study sessions where we were talking about the problem of evil. For those who've been following the show, you probably remember part 1 and part 2 of the No Ceilings, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? And I realized just the other day, I was kind of combing through some old files. I realized I'd never posted part 3. So I was like, man, that's, probably should do that. Some good content there, man. So just coming off of the flu, for those who've been following me on Facebook know all about that. And so I figured, while my voice is kind of getting back strong, this might be a good opportunity to go ahead and post this joint for y'all to enjoy and be edified by. Actually, I was just listening to it again yesterday. I mean, so much content, I forgot I even spoke about it. So it's, I think it'll be beneficial. So definitely check this joint out. And also, man, coming down the pike, man, got a lot of big announcements coming up. Some things I can't speak on just yet, but I got some events coming up, certainly, that I think a lot of people benefit from. As a matter of fact, I can't speak on this one. June 1st, I'm going to be in Detroit. Shout out to my Detroit peoples, my man Tremaine Terrell, Desmond Ingram, the folks out there. Definitely going to be in Detroit, man. We're going to be doing a apologetics conference. I've been invited to speak there with Pastor Kevin Lawson. So I'm excited to get out there and talk with those brothers and sisters in the Lord about doing what I do, man. Doing what I do is apologetics, man. I believe actually we're gonna have a great lineup of speakers, man. Vocab Malone's gonna be there. Jerome Gay, Pastor Jerome Gay rather, and some other notable folks as well. So I'll be giving more details on that for anybody who's in the Detroit area. To come check us out at the Urban Apologetics Conference. It's going to be at Pastor Kevin Lawson's church, June 1st. So that's going to be coming down the pike. I got a couple more speaking events. Like I said, it's a couple things happening, man. I can't speak on all of it just now, but definitely just want to throw that piece out there because that's my next event coming up, so people can kind of prepare for that. Also, man, I'm excited to be launching a video series. About to get back on that. Matter of fact, a lot of people probably don't know. When I first started getting into apologetics, right before I started doing the podcast, I actually was going to do a vlog and end up deciding to do the podcast thing. But I tried to get into vlogging a little bit. And about a year ago or so, a little bit over a year, somebody actually stole my camera as I was coming back from the True Summit, man. That was super whack. But just recently, man, a brother in the Lord blessed me with a new camera, so I'm excited about that. Definitely want to get it in, and going to be doing like 5-minute videos, kind of like hors d'oeuvres, I guess you could say, of the kinds of things that we cover on the podcast, man. So I'm just excited, man. We got a lot of things going on here at Tru-ID, looking to expand what we do and how we do it. You know what I'm saying? So definitely love y'all, man, and check out this Bible study, No Ceilings Bible Study. Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? Part 3. All right.
Island 7:45.
7:45? Huh?
It's 7:45 now.
And we got to stop at 8:30?
8:30.
Oh, yeah, we good.
Right,
I want to try to move through kind of quickly because this is like the end of our series, you know what I mean? So I want to allow time for like some questions and stuff like that if need be. Do I need to step back or? Okay. I'll step back a little bit. Actually, I can't see my notes, but yeah. Okay, so so we've been doing this series. I figured we would kind of sum it up within 3 parts. I think we're pretty much on track to do that. We should be able to finish it up today. And we've been dealing with the problem of evil. It's called the problem of suffering, many times, Actually, this sparked off, if I'm not mistaken, I think somebody asked the question, why do bad things happen to good people, right? And so that's just kind of one of the questions that come up under the big umbrella of the problem of evil. And so we broke it up into 3 parts. First we started out with, what kind of question it is. In our first section, we talked about how it's basically a philosophical question. We dug into a little bit of what, Christian philosophy is, kind of like that intersection between taking the scriptures and the biblical worldview and applying it to philosophical issues, right? And so, that's what we're dealing with here. We also talked about, ways that we can take the pressure off. When somebody asks a question like that, why is there evil in the world, and how can there be a good God if there's so much evil going on? Like, we realize now that, as we discussed, a couple months ago, that it's not a question that only Christians have to answer. I mean, the problem of evil is a worldview issue that any worldview that's worth the salt or wants to make a claim to, being correct has to address, Christians included. So we talked about not painting ourselves in the corner. If somebody asks you that question, it's fair to, not only answer it, but also, have them carry their end of the conversation as well and give an account on their worldview why there's evil in the world. So, things like that, just basically taking the pressure off. We also talked about how there's good reason to think that if there is evil in the world, objective evil, then it actually points toward the existence of God in some senses. Last month we dealt with the logical problem of evil, which, once we kind of broke down how you got like the emotional side and the intellectual side, we talked about how there's 2 main branches of the intellectual problem of evil. We dealt with the logical problem last time, so we can check that out. And now we're going to get to what's called the evidential, sometimes people use the word probability or inductive version of the problem of evil, which is a different kind of argument. So we talked about last time with the logical problem of evil. Philosophers have, pretty much, in the literature just said, okay, yeah, that issue is done. Like, it's already been defeated. Most people are not really going to defend that. But then you've got, like, I guess you could say the scrappy younger brother of the logical problem of evil, which would be like the evidential, or some people would call it the inductive problem of evil. So we're going to be dealing with that today. All right? We good so far?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Oh. So let's take a look at it. Now, I want to say there's many different versions and different ways that people frame the... oh, you had a question?
I heard somebody say, why would a loving God send somebody to torment? Like, I heard an atheist say that.
Sure.
I saw online that he was talking to people like, I don't know how to answer that. Apologetic.
Right.
So
Right.
how would you answer that question like that?
Actually, if you don't mind, can I come back to that? Because, I was just saying, like, there's many different versions. That's actually one way that somebody might pose, the inductive problem of evil. Is like, how, well, actually, I guess that could be more so like the logical version. But I think some of the concepts we're going to cover are going to help me to answer that. So if I can lay the groundwork first, I'll come back to that. But that's a good question. Also, people can check out my podcast, too, the Tru-ID Podcast, because I have like a whole podcast on it. So, shameless plug, you can definitely check that out, too. You know what I'm saying? But, there you go. It's on the, I think I addressed it on the Carlton Pearson episode, one of the Carlton Pearson episodes. But I'll definitely get to it, though. Just kind of keep reminding me. So there's definitely different versions of what we can call the inductive problem of evil, right? Some of them, well, I'll just read this one, and then maybe I'll kind of talk about some of the other versions. We'll just read it straight out, okay? So if God exists, then he is omnipotent, omniscient, and all good. We would agree with that. There is a tremendous amount of evil in the world, some of it not caused by human beings and apparently gratuitous. All right, that's premise 2. Premise 3, it is unlikely that such an amount and kind of evil would exist if there is an omnipotent, omniscient, and all good being. Therefore, number 4, their conclusion. Okay. I think we're good. Sorry about that. My recording has stopped. Okay, so there's a couple key words that we're going to highlight here in just a second. One is going to be these here. And let's see. Her apparently gratuitous, right? And let's see. Amount and kind. Let's see. Where's that word? Unlikely and probably. Okay, so last month when we talked about the logical version of the problem of evil, we talked about the Achilles heel of that version is the fact that it pretty much has to be 100% true. Like, they're basically saying that there's no possible way that God and evil can exist in the same world. It's like there's not enough room in this town for the both of us. You know what I'm saying? So they hold, in order for them to make that case, that's got to be either absolutely true or the whole argument falls apart, right? Now, this inductive argument is a little bit more dangerous because they're actually making a more modest claim. They're saying that it's not so much that it cannot be the case that God and evil are in the same world. They're saying that it's probably not the case. See, that's a much more modest claim. Like last time, we used the example of like the difference between criminal court and civil court. In criminal court, you have to find somebody guilty beyond a reasonable, or the shadow of a whatever that is, reasonable doubt. You know what I'm saying? You know, so that's that would be analogous to the logical version. And then the criminal civil court, it's kind of like the inductive version. Is that it doesn't necessarily have to be beyond a shadow of reasonable doubt. It could just be more likely than not. And that's kind of the target that they're aiming for with the inductive version. So it's like I said, it's a more modest claim, and that's why it's a little bit harder to defend against, right? So just like we did last time, we wanted to attack some of the premises. If we can knock down some of these premises here, then we can destroy the conclusion that they come to. So when we're looking at it, the first premise, we don't really have a problem with that. You know, if God exists, then he is omnipotent, omniscient, and all good. I mean, that's the kind of God that we would defend in the first place, you know, the God that the Bible describes. They're saying that kind of God can't exist given all evil in the world. Now, what I'm going to do, before we move forward to the defenses, let me get here first, I think. This word gratuitous, let's go there. Gratuitous. This is where most of the action is, all right? And these kinds of arguments, when they talk about gratuitous evil, what they mean by that is there's so much evil, or just the nature of evil is so bad that God could not have morally sufficient reasons for allowing it. It's just out of the box. You know what I'm saying? That's what they're really saying that's what they mean by using this word gratuitous. It's just like over the top evil. There's no possible way that any good could come of it. That's really what they mean there, okay? And if there's any of this level of evil, then there can't be a good, omniscient, and omnipotent God in place, right? So this is a key word to the argument, right? We're going to come back to this apparently in a minute. But again, like you see the words unlikely and probably there. That again kind of attests to the lower threshold that they're looking for. It's a lower target, right? So how are we going to attack these two premises? Let's go to the next thing here. We're making good time. All right. We're going to attack. We're good with premise 1. That's not a problem. We're going to attack 2 and 3 and then see where that leaves us. All right. All right. I should have labeled this a little bit better. But our first point, we're going to be targeting premise 2, all right? And then our second point here, we're going to be targeting premise 3. So you kind of have the P3 and the P2 there, kind of keep us organized a little bit, all right? All right, now, as for the statement, right, that I'm going to read it again. I'm going to flip back and forth here. I need one of them blackboard joints, like one of the professor joints. You know, I can just be like, boom, boom, you know what I'm saying? So again, we're going to attack, there's a tremendous amount of evil in the world, some of it not caused by human beings and apparently gratuitous. So we're going to attack that right quick. Now, one defense would be to say that, we just aren't in a position to know that God probably lacks morally sufficient reason for allowing the evil that's obviously apparent in the world. We just can't possibly know that, right? Now let's, I like to use analogies. So let's kind of just, walk with me here for a second, right? Like who saw the Black Panther movie? Everybody, I'm assuming everybody, right? Okay, all right, cool, for sure. Really, like for real? Well, that's pretty cool. Yeah, way more than
maybe like 6.
Hey, I mean, it's a dope movie. So we saw, the beginning of the movie starts out. If anybody hadn't seen on out there in Facebook world, spoiler alert, it is what it is.
Seen it by now.
Shame on you if you haven't seen it though. Shame on you. So, right. So, all right, so the movie starts out with a flashback, right? I'm saying you're in Oakland, and, long story short, T'Chaka, which is Black Panther's dad, runs up on his brother. You find out later this is his brother, kills him. And then, the little boy runs upstairs, finds his dad, they're sad, and you see the spaceship thing flying off, leaves the boy behind, right? Now, later on, we go to find out that, that little boy was Killmonger. And, T'Chaka, Black Panther's dad made the decision. It's like, either I'm going to leave this kid behind or I'm going to go back and get him. He chose to leave him behind, right? Now, think of all the different events that happened based on that one decision. I'm saying that one decision that T'Chaka made to leave that kid behind, now you create Eric Killmonger. I'm saying he goes around the world, all his military, killing all these different kind of people. Eventually, he brings the drama back to Wakanda, right? And so he takes over the throne. Obviously, I don't want to give all the details away for that one person who may not have seen it, but he takes over the throne. Black Panther has to beat him down after getting himself beat down, right? But in the end of the movie, Black Panther beats him, has to kill his, I guess it would be his cousin, right? And then but at the very end, after all this drama goes on, you find yourself back in Oakland. And the Black Panther and, the Wakandans have decided to pour money into the hood, just black people everywhere, and they're going to open themselves up to the world. So everything, is this nice happy ending, right? All those events from one decision. Now, what if T'Chaka had said, all right, we killed my brother, but we don't want this kid to go without, let's go ahead and bring him back to Wakanda. Would you have created an Eric Killmonger? I mean, obviously he might have been mad, about his dad being dead, but you may not have had this dude who's decided, okay, I'm just going to kill everybody and take over the country, right? All these different scenarios, happen just based off that one decision, But again, you have a happy ending at the end. Now, could God, create a world in which, you have all these different decisions being made and yet bring about a happy ending at the end? Is it at least possible that God could do that? Yeah. Well, of course he could. Of course, it's at least possible. Now, if he did, is it possible for us, being finite and only limited to maybe 100, 120 years, could we have such an insight into all the things that God is bringing about such that we could look at every particular instance and say, okay, well, this is how that's going to turn out. That's how that's going to turn out. Of course we can. We can't possibly know, all the ins and outs of how everybody's life is going to work together all over the globe to bring about whatever end there may be. We're just not in a position to know how things are going to go. So we can't possibly say that whether God lacks reason. We can't say that, right? Now, that's a little bit abstract. So let me break it down in a real life example. Okay, this is actually real. We're going from fiction, then we're going to do some history, right? In 1850, it might have been 1852, right? There's a guy named William Cooper Nell, right? He wrote a book called The Colored Patriots. Now, 1850, here in America, we're still dealing with towards the end of the antebellum slavery era, right? His goal was to write a book about African Americans who fought in the Revolutionary War and to tell their stories, because what he wanted to do is show the personhood of black people to change the public perception and thus sway public opinion against slavery. That was his goal for writing that book. Now, in that book, I want to say it's toward the end, I believe it's in Baltimore. He records an incident, right, where you have some gentlemen who were, this would have been probably in your early 1800s, maybe late 1700s, where there's some gentlemen in Baltimore, right? African Americans, right? They were freed people, but you had slave catchers, guys who would just basically yoke you up, whether you was free or not, sell you down south, to make some money, all right? So they ran up on these guys who were up here in Baltimore living free, and they chased them to like a barn or something like that. Long story short, a shootout happens between, these white enslavers and these black guys. Now, this is real. It just actually happened. It's interesting that in the record, what ends up happening, the white guys lose, the slave masters, they lose the firefight, right? And what the black guys say, the African Americans say, is that God shook the bullets out of our clothes. Like basically the exchange back and forth with the shooting was so close, there's no reason why they shouldn't have been hit. But for whatever reason, by miraculous intervention, according to their testimony, none of them got shot. And so they actually, that's the actual quote, said, God shook the bullets out of our clothes. That's what they said. Now, this one incident, not this one incident, but this incident among many gets later on recorded by William Cooper Nell. He puts it out in this book, which influences the national conversation about, race and, and personhood and so on and so forth. That conversation, his contribution, you add to that, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which had the same effect. Frederick Douglass's autobiography and writers had the same effect. So you have all these different writers, challenging the perception, right? Now, fast forward about, a century or so, you've got the civil rights movement, where you got these guys marching up and down the street talking about, I am a man. But what was that? They were testifying to their personhood, right? So this national conversation has swelled to the point where you can then have a Dr. Martin Luther King stand on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and speak to the humanity of African Americans, and on that basis demand their freedom. He's standing on the shoulders of giants who have been saying it for, by that time, at least a century, probably a little bit more. All this to testify to man's personhood, right? You see how these different, pieces are coming together, right? So now these guys from Baltimore who had that one incident, their story is now part of a broader narrative and series of events that has affected us in such a way that we can enjoy freedoms that they didn't have, right? But now we got to do even more, right? We got to do some more homework, because the concept of personhood, if you rewind back to, I want to say the 3rd century, you got a guy named Tertullian, who's a North African theologian, right? Now, Tertullian wrote just a pivotal work on the Trinity. Actually, that word Trinity traces back to Tertullian. He used the word Trinitas. That's what it is in Latin. Now, what's interesting is, as he's writing his works on the Trinity, he speaks of the concept of personhood in a deeper way than writers before him had. And his concept of personhood, given how Christianity was the underpinning of education and the intellectual history of the West, eventually his writings on the Trinity, which included that his piece on personhood, kind of ripples throughout Western thought into the legal traditions of the West, and also governmental theory, right? And actually, it's on that concept of personhood that we can trace, that goes kind of through Tertullian, that African Americans are then standing 1500 years later, attesting to their personhood and using that concept to fight for their freedom. And so now there's no possible way that Tertullian, writing about the Trinity, would have known that 1600 years later that these African Americans, these enslaved persons, were going to be using this concept that he's put into the literature, right, and has rippled all its way through Europe to fight for their freedom. There's no way that he could know that. When he sat down, he was just writing against some heretics of his day. You see what I'm saying? So my whole point is, you have these just incidents of individuals, right, or just one act by an individual having this ripple effect that there's no possible way that they could predict. So again, it speaks to this issue that we're just not in a position to know that God probably lacks morally sufficient reason for anything, because we can't see the future like that. We can't see the sum total of all global events such that we can make that kind of assessment. You see what I'm saying? Now, that being said, what about this word apparent? Because in premise 2 it's saying that this amount and kind of evil is apparently gratuitous. It's apparent. It seems to us that God can't have a good reason. Well, I mean, if you got a God that's omniscient, then there's a bunch of stuff that's not apparent to us, right? You know what I'm saying? That makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, but just because something is not apparent to you, just because there's not a good reason apparent to you, doesn't mean that a good reason doesn't exist. It just means you don't know what it is, right? So again, it could be the case that God has reasons that are not apparent to us, that he has privy to, knowing all things past, present, and future, that makes it such that he could allow for certain levels of evil and know that it's going to trend towards a good end. Just like it says in, I want to say it's Romans 8, that he works all things for the good of those that love God. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of a little snippet version of that there. All right, so we can say then that for premise 2, it's not just that we don't know, the outcome, is that we cannot possibly know, right? And if you're basing an argument on a claim that we cannot possibly know, that's shaky grounds for a good argument. So we can say that premise 2 doesn't really work. Okay. All right. So let's move on to premise 3. Are we good so far?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. How are we doing on time? We good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Cool. All right. So premise 3. We're gonna have 2 levels here. Is it 8 o'clock? Oh yeah, we good. Yeah, we good. Time for questions and all that. Let me make sure my recording's still going here. All right. Yeah, we good. Okay. So now we're going to move on to premise 3. Let's read that again before we start getting into our critiques here. Okay. It is unlikely that such an amount and kind of evil would exist if there is an omnipotent, omniscient, and all good being.
Yeah.
All right. So the key word we're going to focus on here is unlikely, right? And this is why they call, some people call it, the probability argument. It all hinges on, is it likely or unlikely? Okay. That God would allow, this level of evil that we see in the world. Okay. So imagine this, you have like a scale, right? This is a really poor drawing of a scale, but that's the best I could do, right? And so what the atheist is saying, or just the objector is saying, is that the weight of the evil that we see, the evidence makes it such that it's unlikely that God exists. It's kind of just weighing the scale down. So what we want to do is we want to challenge that and just kind of basically make some counter arguments such that we can just kind of raise the bar and then bring that likely down here. We want to weigh the scale down on the likely side. That's what we want to attempt to do as we challenge premise 3. Okay. So let's talk about probabilities a little bit, right? When somebody asks you, is something likely or unlikely, or something is probable or improbable, right? Probabilities are always considered in the context of your background knowledge. Okay. So let me explain what that means. Okay. Let me give an analogy. Right. It makes sense already. So I'm gonna give an analogy. let's say that, a friend of mine walks in here, my man Anthony. I say, hey, this is my man Anthony, and he was walking on the moon last week. Now, people know me. They know I joke around a lot. Sometimes I tell jokes with a straight face. They'll be like, all right, let me just wait for the punchline or something like that. It's not very likely that somebody walks in, and just say, okay, they were just walking on the moon. But let's say that as you turn around, look at this guy, he's got a NASA badge on. He says, hey, man, I just came from work. Now you've got a little bit more information. It's like, well, wait a minute. Okay, now this is just somebody that Adam said was walking on the moon, but he does work for NASA. And let's say you take a look at the badge, right? You're just really curious now. It says astronaut on it. Now, obviously, I don't know if a NASA person would really be walking around with a badge that says astronaut on it, but let's just say that for whatever reason, he's just really proud of his job, and so he's got the astronaut badge on, right? And you're like, hey, this dude is an astronaut. So I get a little piece of this, and now you're wondering, like, dang, maybe my man's really not tripping. Maybe he really did. So as you're thinking, as you turn around, let's say you're sitting in a restaurant, and there's like a TV behind you, like by the bar or something like that. Let's say it's like Ruby Tuesdays. You look up, and the guy who just walked in and has the astronaut badge is now on the TV. His face is there, and it's got the ticker tape. So and so, Anthony, so and so, just returned from the moon last week. Then you're like, oh snap! Now either my man is this is the greatest prank of all time. Somehow you got CNN on it, or this guy really did walk on the moon. So you see how an increase in information can increase the likelihood that something is the case that you previously thought is probably unlikely. Gotcha. Okay. So that's what we're trying to do here. Is there something that we can, so put it this way, let me backtrack. If you were just looking at evil by itself, you're just watching the news, you're seeing, people being shot for whatever reason, you see all the bad things going on, politicians ticking you off, you could be like, if that's all you were taking into consideration, you might be like, dang, man, maybe there really isn't a God, right? Or let's keep it real. I mean, in our personal lives, right? Sometimes things go on where you be like, dad, God, like, where you at? I'm saying, if you're real, then why didn't you do X, Y, and Z? You know what I'm saying? Like, let's just be honest. That happens, right? So if you're just thinking about evil alone, if that's the only information you're taking into account, you actually might come to the conclusion that, dang, maybe God doesn't exist. But what if we start adding information to your paradigm? Maybe we step out of that kind of tunnel vision on evil and start adding more to the picture, right? Now, a couple months ago, we talked about, for example, the moral argument for God's existence. I'm not going to go into all of it here, but we talked about how if there is a such thing as objective evil, then that suggests that there must be such thing as good. If there's evil and good, then there must be a moral law to differentiate between evil and good. If there's a moral law, then, and I would argue that it points to a moral lawgiver. That's a reason to believe that there's such a thing as a God. A couple months ago, we also talked about the resurrection of Jesus. We talked about the historical evidence, that the historical events surrounding the resurrection can be shown based upon the historical data, such that it gives us good reason to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead by the power of God. We could talk about a lot of different arguments. Matter of fact, I was thinking about maybe next month or maybe the next 2 months, we'll go over a couple of arguments for God's existence, in general. Right. But and there's many more that I can name. But if you take into account these different arguments and say, well, wait a minute, if I was just looking at evil, then it might seem kind of bleak. But when I think about the fact that I've got all these different other arguments, right, that point to the existence of a God, then I'm not just considering evil alone. I've got these other things that balance the scales a little bit and say, okay, well, wait a minute. I may have an emotional problem with the evil that I see, but that's not good reason, taking into account everything that I'm considering, all these other arguments, to say that, there's likely no God.
Is it similar to when, I guess, the stereotypical things that people pay black people to do, as if all black people do that? So you're saying, hey, from what I know about black people, we do this.
Well, it could, yeah. So like just basically making, I guess you could say that. So if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is it like stereotyping? Like, okay, well, this is what I see, so therefore this is what it is. Right. Actually, that's kind of how, I should have talked about this earlier. That's kind of how inductive arguments work. All right. So last month we talked about the logical problem, which is what you call a deductive argument. You start from a general principle and you work your way to a specific conclusion. Right. Inductive is the opposite. You start with observations about things that you see, and then you try to draw a broad conclusion from it. So it actually kind of is like that. Okay, I see evil here, I see evil there. Okay, so therefore, from what I'm seeing, this such and such must be the case. Yeah. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And so that's why, it could be the case that based on what somebody sees, they may come to that conclusion. What we want to do is add things to, their observation. Okay, well, have you considered this? Have you considered that?
Yeah.
Even personal experiences. We can't discount that. I mean, I can tell you right now, I've had certain I've had certain things happen in my life, personally, where I'm like, you know what? There's got to be a God. I don't care what anybody else says. This situation might confuse me. That situation, I may not understand it, but I know that God exists. You know what I'm saying? And that's, experience is, it's not infallible, but it is valuable. You know what I'm saying? And so it's something so that we can take into account. Yeah.
Is it hard to have like a respectful dialogue with the atheist?
Is it hard to?
Is it hard to, like what you're saying right now, like some atheists will start looking down and start talking about like personal experience, about what you had going in your life.
Sure.
Let's say like somebody that was the guy, Christian probably said that. I think his name is like Stephen Furtick or something like that.
Stephen Furtick. Okay, yeah, okay.
Like you'll have a book called like How Did I Lose My Faith? How Did I Lose My Faith? Or something like that. And the atheists would shut the book off because they immediately talking about faith. So like it's hard to have like a discussion about like when they start throwing insults at you and stuff like that. Like how do you go about that? Do you end the conversation right there because you're already.
Well, if somebody's throwing insults at me, then I'm going to gauge whether or not they're willing to have a civil discussion. It's happened before. I get insulted all the time, but kind of get used to it. But usually, once I get to that level, I ask the question like, "Look, are you willing to have a real conversation? And if so, then let's do that. But if not, just let me know, and we can just kind of keep it moving. You go your way, I go mine. So it really depends on that person. You know what I'm saying? And when I walk away, again, apologetics is not just giving people information. I actually will pray for that person. Say, hey, God, maybe you can soften his heart. Somebody else can sow a seed and water it, and ultimately the person be saved. I've seen that happen too. I had a guy. Maybe I'll come back to that because that's a whole different story. But to answer your question, I wouldn't say that it's hard necessarily. To be honest with you, most conversations I've had with atheists have actually gone pretty well. It hasn't erupted into some negative, bitter type of exchange, right? Usually what I'll say in terms of the argument from personal experience, I think there's a way that you can word things and argue for that makes it a little bit easier and more respectable for the person who's prone to discount your personal experiences. So remember we talked about last month how like there are certain intersections between things that are common sense and what philosophers would consider to be like relevant, legitimate reasons for believing or disbelieving something or for holding a position. Like when people say, God works in mysterious ways. Well, a lot of people are like, forget that. That's garbage. Well, no, actually, that's a legitimate concept. Somebody just reframed it and call it skeptical theism in the philosophical literature. But it's a legitimate concept. And you know how to defend it. You can kind of take that commonsensical concept and then, frame it in a way that's, has more intellectual caliber to it. And it's the same thing with personal experience. And we could talk about what's called reformed epistemology, which is basically the idea that God reaches to us in such a way that, he makes himself apparent, in our everyday lives through experience, nature, so on and so forth. So there's ways to defend it. We can go into that for sure. So with the probability version, let's say again, if we're just taking evil into account, then we might think that it's improbable that God exists. But if we take the various different arguments for God into account, we take into account maybe we've had some personal experiences that we just can't shake it. It just really appears to us, when we really grind our teeth and think about it, that God really does exist. We have good reason to think that, actually taking all the evidence together and not just being tunnel vision on evil, taking it all together, actually it is probable that God exists. It's more likely than not, at least, right? Maybe we can come back to that. All right, so I'm kind of breeze through this last part here, but so far we've been dealing with what's called theism in general, just that a God exists of some sort, But now let's hone it down a little bit. Let's tighten it up and just talk about Christianity specifically. Is there something about Christianity specifically that increases the likelihood that a God can exist, even with the amount of evil that we see in the world? And I would say, obviously, yes. First, we're going to start with, what is the purpose of life? I'm gonna ask you guys. I know it's a deep question. Just kind of off the top of your head, if you could put it in a word or a sentence, what's the purpose of life, right?
To enjoy it and I've heard this definition before.
Okay.
The meaning of life is the purpose of it.
Meaning of life, purpose of life. Yeah, kind of interchangeable there. Yeah.
It's something to enjoy God forever.
All right, something to keep or to enjoy God forever. Let's stick with that. Anybody else want to take a stab at it? Just your own thought, whatever you think. For now. All right. So the American dream would be different from, what he described, which is, knowing God, right? So let's kind of use those two points, right? Now, from a Christian perspective, then we wouldn't say that the purpose of life is happiness, right? That didn't sound right. Let's say if the purpose of life was the American dream, just basically happiness, then yeah, one would think, dang, all this evil in the world doesn't seem right. Because if the purpose of life is happiness, then God is either asleep at the wheel or he just doesn't exist. So that's the purpose of life, right? But biblically speaking, I would agree with you. That's not the purpose of life. The purpose of life is not happiness, right? It's a bigger picture to why we're here than just to feel good. The purpose of life is to know God. All right, think about the two greatest commandments. The two greatest things we're commanded to do is to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And secondly, to love others as you love yourself. Those are the two greatest commandments. The number one has to do with knowing God, being in relationship with him, right? Now, if that's the number one reason why we're here, could God achieve drawing people to himself and knowing him by allowing certain levels of evil? Is it possible that somebody can come to know God or know them better through negative circumstances? Of course it is. It happens to us all the time.
All the time.
Right? Now let's put a little scripture to it, right? I want to say it's in James. It says, count it all joy when you fall into various trials and tribulations, because joy works faith and patience, and it makes you mature. That's exactly what it says, right? So part of our process of being mature in our walk with God involves trials, right? So this Christian doctrine of why we're here, and it allows for, evil to not be stumbling blocks, but rather building blocks or stepping stones toward knowing God more completely. So therefore, it could be the case that the God of the Bible allows certain levels of evil, right, in order for us to know him better. Let's say it's at least possible, right? Okay, and I would say that it is the case. Now, secondly, another doctrine is sin. Man is in rebellion against God. I mean, that's just a basic Christian doctrine, right? Adam and Eve, the fruit, so on and so forth. Now, obviously, when you do bad things, you can just see in the world, when we do bad things, many times, not all the time, but, many times you have some negative consequences. If I put my hand on the hot stove, I'm going to burn myself. You know what I'm saying? If I, steal money from the company that I work for, well, if I get caught, then that's not going to work out too well for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a cause and effect to life, right? And so, what the Bible has to say about it is there's sin in the world. We've all sinned. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And as a result, we live in this fallen world in which bad things are going on, right? I'm going to skim through these next ones. Eternity. One of the biggest mistakes I want to say that we make as Christians sometimes is that we don't take eternity serious. Yeah. Or at least we don't take it serious enough, right? Now, if this life is all we've got, if this is it, just one and done, whether you live right or live wrong, what have you, then with all this evil in the world, it's like, man, that really sucks. It's like, this is all I got. And on top of that, there's nothing else for me to look forward to. But as a Christian, right, from a biblical perspective, eternity is real. Like, this isn't the only realm in which God has to work to bring about his plans, his ultimate plans, right? It's not like he's on that 24-second shot clock and then once again it's like, this life is over. It's like, all right, well, I guess y'all screwed. No, God has an eternity, right, to bring about the fullness of his ultimate will of good for his people, right? Now, it's just kind of like how, let's say you had like a nightmare. Let's imagine like a kid, right? Say, your child wakes up with a nightmare, they're crying, they run in your room and all that kind of stuff. They're just scared out of their mind, whatever it is. It might bother them at 9 a.m., but a week later, unless there's something really wrong, they're probably not going to be still afraid of that nightmare. Over time, you eventually, forget what you dreamed about, right? I remember when I was a kid, for whatever reason, it was weird. It's like way before Jurassic Park or anything. I had this dream. Actually, I'm kind of contradicting myself. I actually remember it, but I had this dream that I was under the kitchen table, and this dinosaur would walk in. And then just as it peeked below the kitchen table, like, the dream would end. It just, like, freaked me out. I had that dream, like, 4 times, you know what I mean? Wow. But it doesn't still scare me now. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's something wrong with me if, like, I'm still afraid of that same dream. You see what I'm saying? So my point is, when you think about eternity, if it is a case that we experience negative things in this life, right? But then you get into eternity, you have this infinity of good things going on. Eventually, this finite period of time in which evil things are going on is going to be like, in your rear view mirror. It gets further and further away to the point where it just becomes this distant reality that no longer impacts your well-being there at the moment. You see what I'm saying? So we have eternity to gain. So that's why Apostle Paul, again, we're going to throw some more scripture at it. We're showing the intersection between Christianity and these philosophical Christians. This is Christian philosophy, right? Paul says that, this weight that we're under right now, these struggles that we're enduring right now is working for us a much heavier weight of glory, right? So we don't look at the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. The things that are seen are temporary. The things that are unseen are eternal. You see what I'm saying? So again, this eternity that we're looking forward to, right, outweighs whatever these finite evils that we might encounter now. Just like what it says about Jesus, that for the joy of what was set before him, he endured the cross. I'm saying we can endure what's going on here now for the joy that is set before us in eternity, right? Lastly, God himself is an incomparable good. I don't care what you experience in this life, right? I don't care how bad it is. I don't care if you just have the world's miserable life ever for however long you're on this earth, right? God himself, we talked about this a couple months ago with the moral argument. God himself is good in the same sense that I am Adam Coleman, right? He is goodness, right? And you will be with that goodness for eternity in fellowship, unbroken fellowship with him forever, right? So we're not just gaining, and so many times we focus on heaven, I think, too much, and that may sound weird, or the new kingdom too much. Really, we haven't gained a place by coming to the cross, right? We've been reconnected to a person. And we're not just going to switch locations when we die, and we're just in a better city or something like that. You know what I'm saying? With less crime or something, right? We're gaining a personal relationship with goodness, the very epicenter, the very nature of goodness for eternity. And that goodness outweighs, we're going to use the scale analogy again, that outweighs any limited, finite negative that we may experience here, right? So there's things about Christianity itself, specifically, that takes us beyond just general theism, that gives us good reason that it's not the case. That given the fact that we'll enjoy an eternal good that God knows we'll experience, even through the evil that ultimately has strengthened us anyway, right? Is a morally a good God, an omniscient God, an omnipotent God. It's likely that he might allow for certain levels of evil to bring about those kinds of outcomes. Okay. So with that being said, going back for a second, we'd actually flip this argument on its head, right? We can say that, okay, well, given the fact that it is actually likely that a God exists who would allow certain kinds of evil, I want to take us back to, remember, this whole argument revolves around the concept of gratuitous evil, right? Evil for which God doesn't have morally sufficient reason. We can actually flip it and make like a reversal argument, right? Kind of like in the WWE, I guess it's still like that. Somebody hits you with the headlight, you reverse it, right? You know what I'm saying? We can use this reversal of the problem of, this G stands for gratuitous, the problem of gratuitous evil, right? We can say that if God exists, then gratuitous evil does not exist in the world. God exists. We have good reason to believe that. Therefore, gratuitous evil does not exist in the world. So we've kind of flipped it and made our own deductive argument, to kind of mirror, right? So, kind of summing it all up. I think we're doing pretty good on time, so we should have room for questions and whatnot. So, kind of summing it up. Going back over the last. Are we good? Okay.
8:26.
Oh, snap! I'm a beast. So going over the last couple of months, right? We talked about how we started out with why do bad things happen to good people, right? And we discovered that this is one version, one brand of a larger problem, which is called the problem of evil by philosophers. We broke it down how you have the emotional problem of evil, which is more so just kind of dealing with it, feeling bad about it. Like nobody feels good about evil. If you do, there's something probably wrong with you, right? But then you have the intellectual side, and we broke that into two different intellectual arguments: the logical problem, and we just dealt with the inductive problem. Kind of just breezed through it. And this, we showed how Christian philosophy, taking biblical principles and applying it to philosophical issues, kind of how we can have that intersection and give good reasons for the hope that we have. And a couple more points I want to hit. I'm gonna sum up real quick, right? Going back to the original question, why do bad things happen to good people? One response to that would be, well, they don't. Bad things don't happen to good people because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So when we say good, like nobody is good in the sense of, the God kind of goodness, like that intrinsic, without blemish kind of good, right? Nobody's good like that, right? We know that. So really when we say, why do bad things happen to good people, what we really mean is, why do bad things happen to those kinds of people who are better than average? You know what I'm saying? They're the kind of people, when we compare them against Jeffrey Dahmer or maybe the average dude walking around, this dude is a really good dude. Like, why would something like that happen to him, right? Well, the fact of the matter is that these good folks, these better than average folks, are still imperfect. You know what I'm saying? They're still infected with sin just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And they're fallen, and we live in a fallen world. So independent of how good or how, whatever you are, the world around you is still infected with sin. It's just like it says, I want to say it's in Romans 1, or it might be confusing with 8, but, this whole earth groans in pain for the revelation of the sons of God, when God's going to make all things new. It's like he talks about in Revelation, right? He's going to, it's going to be a new heaven, a new earth. We're just hitting that reset button. You know what I'm saying? And we're starting over again, right? But that being said, these folks that we believe to be, better than average, they still live in this fallen world. Mankind has strayed away from a good God who intended good things, and now we're faced with the results of that. But the good news is contrary to some other worldviews, this good God is not standing off in the distance like some old bearded dude in the sky, sending lightning bolts every now and again, or just sitting back with his arms folded, right? That's what they see him as, right? With this God that we're talking about, with sin being central to the problem, he actually got involved in the most central problem of human history, right? He got involved. He got on that cross, entered into suffering on our behalf to save us from this suffering and sin that we all see, right? He wasn't distant. He got his hands dirty, right? In addition to that, this same God is ultimately going to bring about a good that's, that for us, that's in line with his nature. And then on top of that, with the evil that we experience now, this kind of God gets his hands dirty in our lives.
Yeah.
He helps us, whether it be directly delivering us from situations or giving us the strength to persevere, one way or the other. He gets involved in our lives and comes alongside us to help us overcome this evil in this world. It's like Jesus said, in this world you should have tribulations, but be of good cheer because I've overcome the world, right? When you think about Acts chapter 12, you have Peter, who's in prison. They yoked him up. He's in prison. They're probably going to execute him. But God delivers him. The angel comes in, breaks him out of prison. Boom, he's good. He escapes. But then you have, so that's one kind of deliverance. But then you have in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, a different chapter 12, right? You have Paul talking about, man, I got this thorn in the flesh. And Jesus was like, I ain't going to let it up. But my grace is sufficient, right? So you got two kinds of deliverance. You got the kind that brings you out of a situation, and you got the kind that helps you to get through. One way or the other, we serve a God who's willing to get involved and deliver us toward that which he's ultimately purposed. So we can say in the individual life, I can't say why any specific bad thing happens to a person. I have to be God to know that. But, in the same way that I believe what the Bible says about God, I also believe what it says about man and believe what it says about this world. We are sinful. We live in a sinful world. We have a good God who's ultimately drawn us to himself into an incomparable good for eternity. There we go.
Yeah.
So, and your question again, give it to me again so I can make sure I answer it. Now, I'm going to give you, there's a lot of different ways to approach that answer. I'm going to give you my perspective, and I recognize that my perspective is worded in a way that certain theological camps wouldn't like it, but I'm just going to say it anyway. Okay? I'm just going to give you my perspective, and then maybe I can refer you to some resources so you can kind of draw from different perspectives and see what you come to. Now, my perspective is this. Yeah, I'm going to. Yeah, I'm just going to preface it by saying that I can't speak for all theologians. I'm just going to give you where I'm coming from. If somebody would ask me that question, I would say there's only one reason why people don't go to heaven for eternity or don't go to the new kingdom for eternity, and that reason is they've rejected relationship with God. God, if you think about the Trinity, God is innately a relational being, right? And he created us to be in relationship with himself. Now remember, a second ago I said that God isn't just good in the sense that he's well behaved. God is goodness. He's good in the same sense that I'm Adam. So anytime you sin and participate in evil, you've divorced yourself from the good, which aka God, right? Now, if everything hinges upon us being brought into a relationship with him, and that's the reason why he's created us, to glorify him in the context of a relationship, if somebody chooses to not be in a relationship with him, they can do that. God will honor that choice. I believe that we have some degree of free will to where we can say, God, I don't want you. And if you don't want him, he's not going to force himself on you. I'm saying he hasn't created us to be robots, right? Such that I don't think he's created us to be robots such that we can't choose otherwise. We can reject God for eternity if we want to. And for anybody who rejects God for eternity, God is just, and saying, well, okay, well, if that's what you want, because I want real love and not fake love, I'm not going to change your will by some voodoo and make you love me. You can have what you want. I would rather you say, God, thy will be done. But instead, if that's what you want, then I'll say, well, okay, your will be done. Depart from me, I never knew you. You see what I'm saying? And so that's why I believe a just God can send people to hell. Now, people have different perspectives on hell. If it's a burning lake but wherever it is, I ain't trying to go. So, and the bottom line is, I think that you get there by saying, okay, God, I don't want you. You know what I'm saying? And every time we sin, we're saying, God, I don't want you. It's not just that we've, broken some weird rule that's off in space somewhere. No, we've actually divorced ourselves from God's very nature. That's what we do every time we sin. Now, it's just like with a married couple. I'm saying if somebody cheats on the other person, say if I cheat on my wife, God forbid, I can wash dishes for the rest of my life. I can cook every meal. I can take out bags of trash. I can bring home diamond rings every day of the week. But unless she decides to forgive me, I will not have forgiveness. I'm saying, so there's two sides to it, right? I can do it. So that's why, again, Christianity is not a works-based thing. It's all relational. And so God is like, look, you cannot do anything to earn my forgiveness. In the same way that washing dishes don't earn my wife's forgiveness, for stepping out. The only way you're going to get this forgiveness is if I give it to you. And I gave it to you through the cross. If you accept that, it's all good. If you don't, then you have what you choose. And that's how I would answer that.
Word up. Well, much.
You good? I see people pondering. I'm not sure if that means I did a good job or bad. Okay, cool. All right, cool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, word up. I'm going to close out with prayer, and then after that, you got to be free. Please talk some more, whatever y'all want to do. Dear God, thank you for this.
And there it is, man. That was a good way to wrap up that series there on the problem of evil. Definitely, man, if you listen to this episode and you hadn't heard part 1 and part 2 of the No Ceilings, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People, definitely go back and check those out, man. Part 1 and part 2, and then maybe listen to this again, because it'll kind of give you a flow of how we covered that topic, man. I mean, the problem of evil is certainly one of the more serious, profound, impactful, difficult to tackle subjects of philosophy, man, particularly when you get into the philosophy of religion. So I was glad we was able to, take a stab at it. But with that being said, man, I just want to say I appreciate you guys out there. Definitely, check us out on iTunes and all the other outlets that we're on. Give us 5 stars, spread the word about what we're doing here. And, if it's, Lord put it on your heart, consider supporting us over at patreon.com/Adam Coleman, man. It's the supporters that keeps this thing going. And, definitely check out our YouTube channel. Hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, the whole 9, man. I'm pretty, easy to find. And, definitely love to engage with everybody who's listening to the show, man. So once again, man, it's another episode in the books. Love y'all, man. Peace.